In this video, we will continue our discussion about user-defined classes. In particular, we will discuss what are constructors. In addition to the methods necessary to implement operations, every class can have special types of methods called constructors. A constructor has the same name as the class, and it executes automatically when an object of that class is created. Constructors are used to guarantee that the instance variables of the class are initialized. There are two types of constructors, those with parameters and those without parameters. The constructor without parameters is called the default constructor. Constructors have the following properties. The name of a constructor is the same as the name of the class. A constructor, even though it is a method, has no return type. That is, it is neither a value returning method nor a void method. A class can have more than one constructor. However, all constructors of a class have the same name. That is, the constructors of a class can be overloaded. If a class has more than one constructor, the constructors must have different signatures. Constructors execute automatically when class objects are instantiated. Because they have no types, they cannot be called like other methods. If there are multiple constructors, the constructor that executes depends on the type of values passed to the class object when the class object is instantiated. For the class clock, we will include two constructors, the default constructor and a constructor with parameters. The default constructor initializes the instance variables used to store the hours, minutes, and seconds, each to 0. Similarly, the constructor with parameters initializes the instance variables to the values specified by the user. We will illustrate shortly how constructors are invoked. The heading of the default constructor is public, clock, open and close parentheses. The heading of the constructor with parameters is public class int hours, int minutes, int seconds. The definition of the class clock has 16 members, 11 methods to implement the 11 operations, 2 constructors, and 3 instance variables to store the hours, minutes, and seconds. Note, if you do not include any constructor in a class, then Java automatically provides the default constructor. Therefore, when you create an object, the instance variables are initialized to their default values. For example, int variables are initialized to 0. If you provide at least one constructor and do not include the default constructor, then Java will not automatically provide the default constructor. Generally, if a class includes constructors, you should also include the default constructor. In this section, we will discuss unified modeling language class diagrams. A class and its members can be described graphically using Unified Modeling Language or UML notation. For example, Figure 8-1 shows the UML diagram of the class clock. Also, what appears in the figure is called the UML class diagram of the class. The top box in the UML diagram contains the name of the class. The middle box contains the data members and their data types. The last box contains the method names, parameter list, and return types. The plus sign in front of a member indicates that it is a public member. The minus sign indicates that it is a private member. The symbol before a member name indicates that it is a protected member. Variable declaration and object instantiation. Once a class is defined, you can declare reference variables of that class type. For example, the following statements declare my clock and your clock to be reference variables of type clock. Line 1, clock, my clock. Line 2, clock, your clock. These statements do not allocate memory spaces to store the hours, minutes, and seconds. Next, we explain how to allocate memory space to store the hours, minutes, and seconds, and how to access that memory space using the variables my clock and your clock. The class clock has three instance variables. To store the hours, minutes, and seconds, we need to create a clock object, which is accomplished by using the operator new. The general syntax for using the operator new is new space then the class name, or new then the class name with parameters argument 1, comma argument 2, comma ellipsis, comma argument n. The expression in line 3 instantiates the object and initializes the instance variables of the object using the default constructor. The expression in line 4 instantiates the object and initializes the instance variables using a constructor with parameters. For the expression in line 4, the number of arguments and their type should match the formal parameters in the order given of one of the constructors. If the type of the arguments does not match the formal parameters of any constructor in the order given, Java uses type conversion and looks for the best match. For example, an integer value might be converted to a floating point value with a zero decimal part. Any ambiguity will result in a compile time error. Consider the following statements and notice that my clock and your clock are as declared in lines 1 and 2. My clock equals new clock in line 5. Your clock equals new clock with parameters 9, 35, and 15 in line 6. The statement in line 5 allocates memory space for a clock object, initializes each instance variable of the object to 0, and stores the address of the object into my clock. The statement in line 6 allocates memory space for a clock object, initializes the instance variables r, min, and sec of the object to 9, 35, and 15 respectively, and stores the address of the object into your clock. See Figure 8-2. To be specific, we call the object to which my clock points the object my clock, and the object to which your clock points the object your clock. See Figure 8-3. Of course, you can combine the statements to declare the variable and instantiate the object into one statement. For example, the statements in lines 1 and 5 can be combined as clock my clock equals new clock, open and close parenthesis. It declare and instantiate my clock. That is, the preceding statement declares my clock to be a reference variable of type clock and instantiates the object my clock to store the hours, minutes, and seconds. Each instance variable of the object my clock is initialized to 0 because it uses the default constructor. And the default constructor has no parameters. As you see, clock, open and close parenthesis. Similarly, the statements in lines 2 and 6 can be combined as clock your clock equals new clock with arguments 9, 35, and 15. It declares and instantiates your clock. That is, the statement declares your clock to be a reference variable of type clock and instantiates the object your clock to store the hours, minutes, and seconds. The instance variables HR, min, and sec of the object your clock are initialized to 9, 35, and 15 respectively by the constructor with parameters. Note, when we use phrases such as create an object of a class type, we mean to declare a reference variable of the class type, instantiate the class object, and store the address of the object into the reference variable declared.